Good morning, everybody. The start of another week. The weather's been really lovely this past few days. Crisp fall days with beautiful blue sky and that little chill in the air that just lets you know winter's coming. So today I was thinking of talking about talent. So often people say that you need to be born with talent, and they conclude then that if you were not born with it, that you can never acquire it. I happen to disagree with the idea that you must be born with it. When we are born, we are basically a blank slate. We don't know how to talk. We don't know how to tie our shoes. We don't know how to walk. We don't know any language. Everything is a learning experience. And it feels to me as though we assume that that learning ends at some point. That at some point in our lives, there's no point in trying to do anything different. And the idea that you have to be born with it is one of those limitations that is just so widely accepted when it shouldn't be. In fact, there's a book called This Is Your Brain on Music that talks about this. In their studies, what they found was that people who were considered not to be born with it could actually acquire the skill that they were looking for. And they determined that it took, on average, about 10,000 hours of practice for the non-talented person to reach the level of the born with it talented person. What's really interesting as well is that they say that in their determinations, it seems like the person who worked hard to develop the talent and develop the skill actually was in a way more solid, had more foundation than the person who was born with it. And I would say that's probably because of the process they went through. They had to go on a journey. And when they began, they had no idea where that journey would take them. They had no idea if the journey would be successful, but they were willing to try. And maybe they fell off the wagon a few times in their pursuit of acquiring this knowledge and skill, but somehow they managed to keep working on it to the point where their skill level matched the born with it talented person. But they had something that perhaps that other person didn't, and that is all of the knowledge and skill that they'd learned taught them something about themselves and about the capabilities of other people. So in a way, a lot of times we find that the teachers and mentors that we have are the people that have gone through that process of development and struggled with it, struggled with doubt, struggled with fear, struggled with the idea that they'd never be good enough or why bother, but somehow they continued to work on it. In my own story, that's what happened to me. I gave up any idea of doing art or music for a living, primarily because I felt I'd never be good enough, but also because I was taught that you can't do art for a living. And so I went off and worked in offices, corporations, in administration, and things like that. It was kind of a bit of a rock bottom in my 30s that woke me up. I had been married, my marriage broke up. I had been working at a corporation and supervised like 18 people. I remember talking to my father one night on the phone, and and it was in Toronto, and it was minus 35, and I just said to him, "I'm so unhappy here." He said, "But you're making such good money." When I look back on that, I think, "Dad, come on." Anyway, I came back home to the West Coast feeling very lost because I'd resigned my job, I'd failed at my marriage. I felt very lost and unsure of what the next step would be. So I did a lot of soul searching. And I thought, ever since I was a little girl, I have wanted to be a singer, but I never pursued it. So I retrained as a graphic designer because I thought that would be something at least a little creative that I could do for work. And after I'd finished that training and got myself a job, I contacted a friend of mine who I knew was taking voice lessons and got the number of a voice teacher. You have to remember, I was mid-30s. So yeah, people look at that as a little bit of a hobby, but in my mind and my heart, I wanted to be that singer. And thus began my path of constant doubt as to why I was wasting my teacher's time and wasting my own money in doing this, trying to become a singer. I went to my first lesson and sang a couple of airy scales, and I remember him saying to me, "So what's your goal?" And I said, "I just want to be able to sing. I could have danced all night, make the G at the end, the high note at the end." And then, almost under my breath, very, very softly, I said, "I don't know if I could ever sing opera, but if I could, that would be neat." But of course, I felt that that would be impossible. So the lessons progressed year after year. After 5 years, that teacher passed away, unfortunately. I started to work with a student of his. And because that person, his name was Gary, was also a terrified singer, something clicked, and the way that he worked with me and the way that he talked about this raised my consciousness. I would have to say that I had to go through the first 5 years in order to find my voice by the 8th year. So yeah, 8 years to find my voice, to open my mouth and allow myself to sing. Even still, I was struggled with stage fright, which had been plaguing me ever since I could remember. When I looked at my journey, I think it took me about 8 years to find my voice and 12 years to be able to sing without fear in front of people. At some point in that process, it became not so much about ever singing anywhere. I just sort of instinctively knew that this process of working on my voice was a method of working on myself, because as I developed abilities and developed perspective, I started to understand that the things that limited me in singing were the things that limited me in life. And I sort of have this picture of one incident that occurred after those long years that's demonstrated to me that I had graduated from this school to some extent, because we never stopped learning. that I had gone to a restaurant and I was sitting in the waiting area waiting for a table, and I saw this person coming towards me, and you could just tell they were excited to see me and were going to talk to me. And normally, my reaction to something like that would be negative. Not about them, but about me. Oh no, I'm going to have to make a conversation. Oh no, I maybe, oh, maybe I could get up and leave. My first reaction would always be fear. As they approached and got closer, instead of fear, what I felt in myself was a rising of positive vibes, a rising of positivity. I looked up at them and I was ready to engage in conversation. I was ready to say, "Hey, it's great to see you," even though at the time I couldn't quite remember who they were or how I knew them. But I was ready. I was ready to have this encounter with them. And then I realized they were looking at somebody behind me outside the window. But that didn't matter because I had felt that wish to connect, that that sense that, hey, I want to do this, which I had never had before. I don't think learning about yourself ever ends. One of the books I talk about a fair bit is Julia Cameron's The Artist's Way. It's supposed to be a workbook, 12 weeks long, working on your creativity, but it's much, much more than that. It really helps you start to engage in the creative process. It starts to make you think about what were my dreams and what are my wishes and why do I think it's impossible to achieve them. And that's my message for today. I hope it makes sense. You take care. Be safe out there.
Swing low, sweet cherry.